virtual coffee talk on managing applications from beyond the data center. Today's recording today's webinar is going to be recorded for you. I'm Ben Miller from Brightworks Group, and I wanted to introduce our panel here. We have Doug Miller, our CEO and founder of Brightworks Group. It's a nationwide IT consulting.
Oh, Ben cut out. I'll just pick right up. We're the Brightworks Group. We're a nationwide cybersecurity and IT operations consulting company based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. With us today, Frank, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Frank Seal. I work for Scale Computing. I'm one of the lead solutions architects over at Scale Computing.
Great, thanks. And we're happy to have Frank with us. Scale is a major partner of ours. We've known these guys for many, many years, but there's some really interesting things happening both in the overall world of infrastructure virtualization these days, but specifically at Scale. And so we wanted to take a little bit of time today to talk through what some of those things were, get the audience acquainted with some of the things that are going on, and be available to answer questions about those things. I know there's a lot of buzz today, particularly around some things that have happened with some of the major vendors in the space. So we wanted to address some of that, talk about some of those things, and then open the floor up for discussion. All right. See, Ben has dropped off again for a second here, so we'll just go ahead and kind of dive in here. You ready to go, Frank?
Yep, sure thing.
All right. Well, let's kind of kick things off in general. The topic of today's webinar is managing applications from beyond the data center. And specifically, we're starting to talk about edge computing. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not entirely sure everybody knows what it means. What is edge computing, and why would companies be interested in edge computing?
Yeah, so great question with that there. So a lot of these kind of buzzwords that happen, right? Everybody kind of has a little bit different definition of what that would be. So, with us, I'll share a couple of slides here. Hopefully that's visible there. Hold on one second. There we go. So when it comes to edge computing, right? What's driving this buzzword is organizations. They're getting where they're getting their data from is changing, right? All the important data is no longer just living in a nice, clean, air-conditioned data center anymore. So more and more of this data, it's being created, it's being used out in the world, right? And so, up here on this slide, kind of the way we define the edge computing is basically any location where that mission critical, that important data, where it runs outside of a cloud environment or a data center environment. And so what I mean by that is now edge locations could be something like a common retail location, like a gas station, a fast food location, retail stores, things like that. Those type of locations, they'll have digital signage, point of sale, real-time inventory apps, and all. To me, the rise of the IoT devices really kind of spurred the kind of edge movement here. But all of that is what you would call edge, right? It's the equipment, the infrastructure that's needed to kind of give that to the customers and use that at those locations. It's not housed necessarily back at a large data center somewhere. Another example of it is kind of manufacturing. We're seeing quite a big rise in manufacturing. So an edge doesn't necessarily have to be 3 states away from you. It could be within the same 4 walls of your building, but now, with the increase of automation, robotics, there's a need for more real-time analytics on those computers or on those manufacturing devices for QA. Some of those, they need to review and react to information in real time, and they can't do that back within the server room that they have. So they have to put gear out on the factory floor there. So in lots of these cases, running stuff in the cloud is just not reliable enough, or it's just not fast enough to address those type of concerns there.
Yeah. We've had a couple of customers, one a major region-wide car wash chain that was handling thousands of cars a day coming through and adjusting the wash and everything for each one of those, and then having to provide data back. And so they had to utilize an edge kind of architecture. They simply couldn't put the POS system back at their data center or up in a cloud. They needed it right there at the car wash. And then in a prior life, I used to run an industrial robotics company. So what you're talking about is spot on, right? You can't have the robots do what they need to do with any sort of data latency, because they live in a real-time world. So, all right. So Edge is a solution to those things where the latency that we might be able to tolerate in say, a CRM application that wouldn't be noticeable necessarily to the average user is going to be a problem for other kinds of applications.
Yeah, or it's too expensive to run fiber all the way out to those locations like a factory.
Yeah, well, and agriculture may be a case. We've worked with a number of agricultural companies that, by their very nature, an agriculture of a farm, or we had one facility that was grain storage and grain drying. They're not, they're not in a place where there's a data center. They're out, right?
Yeah.
And so that could be another situation. Scale computing, you guys provide a solution that is based around hyper-converged infrastructure. That's another great buzzword these days. What is HCI, and what does it have to do with edge computing?
Yeah. So buzzwords galore, right? So hyperconvergence, we're the pioneers of hyperconvergence. I know a lot of people say, well, I've never heard of scale computing, or you the new guys. We're the ones that basically created this buzzword. And when we created it, it had that specific meaning to us. You talk to different vendors, they'll all say, hey, they got hyperconverged switching and this and that. And so, but to us, when we kind of created it, the main takeaway was we wanted everything you need in a highly available virtual solution all encompassed into that one device, right? I want the storage, I want the compute, and I want the hypervisor in there. That's why we put hyper in the converged systems that were out there. We didn't want to, where it requires a bunch of additional third-party components that I need to kind of bolt on to make it work. And so because of this being that holistic design, I believe it has a lot of benefits when it comes to that edge computing space, right? So number one, for edge, it's not always a pretty location, right? It's not a clean server room. It's not raised flooring and all of that stuff. So it's usually going to be a back closet somewhere, right? It might be people putting towers underneath a manager's desk or something like that. It shares space with the cleaning chemicals within that location there, right? And so space is always a critical issue when we're talking edge, the cooling and overall physical security there. And so having us be a hyper-converged product put us basically ahead of the curve when it came to the edge computing trend here, because that traditional approach, like on this slide you see on the left, that's what people commonly think of when they think of a a virtual solution, right? I'm going to get some kind of shared storage, whether it's a SAN or a NAS, and then network it up to some host servers. And then I got to decide what hypervisor to use. So I have all these vendors in play. That leads to kind of finger pointing when it comes to troubleshooting time, right? But there's also different SLAs by those vendors, different support contracts, ongoing costs, licensing different features there. And so by creating this hyper-converged infrastructure, it's all one solution. It works hand in glove together. It's built together. So that way it's a lot more robust, a lot more reliable, but also a lot more affordable there as well.
Excellent. Well, and we found with a number of our customers that have that we've helped put scale solutions in place. It's all those things.
Mm-hmm.
What it also is simpler for the IT team at our customers to manage because it all is one thing. It's all self-contained. They may have different nodes in different places because they're doing edge things. We have one customer that, they've got stuff in Indianapolis, but they've got stuff just like you were talking about. It's literally in a closet in a warehouse, right? Yeah. And this person moved from a different hypervisor, very much more the traditional approach, and it's saving him hours a week in admin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's saving them lots of dollars that they were having to do with other cloud solutions and things because he's moved to an edge architecture. So, it's technically simpler. It's more affordable. Everything's in one box, and it's just easier to administer. So that's what we find really powerful.
Yeah, and for some folks, it's hard to quantify the cost savings of saving time, but it's huge. It's very impactful.
It really is. I mean, we hear back from customers we've worked with to move over to Scale, and they're just astounded. They knew they were going to save time, but they didn't realize they were going to save this much time.
Yeah.
So that's really huge. The elephant in the room with this, right? I mean, there's been a lot going on with VMware, with the Broadcom acquisition and the changes and the licensing changes and the partner changes. Where does Scale fit into that? I mean, do we need to be looking at VMware licensing for using Scale, and how does that all work?
Yeah. So first of all, no. Right. Let's kind of kick that additional cost to the curb there. Right. And so when we developed this product, even from the very genesis of it, it's always been the idea of no longer needing to pay for VMware. Right. So because hey, I'm a self-confessed, for 18 years, I was a VMware admin for different organizations, right? So I knew VMware inside and out. I ran user groups, did meetings for that stuff. And so I was waving that flag quite a bit when it come to the VMware stuff. But over time, the product kind of changed, right? The attitude of the organization through its different kind of acquisitions there. And so it started becoming basically the only play for the big guys, right? And so they gradually started dropping feature sets and this and that. And so that's kind of why we've stayed in our lane of saying, hey, we've always been that VMware alternative. It's not, hey, we just popped up because of the Broadcom stuff. Since the beginning of the product back in 2011, we've always kind of been the kind of alternative to the VMware stuff. The slide that I just put up, Ziff Davis, which is a kind of big publisher here, that every year they always kind of query the VMware admins out there and basically ask them, hey, what's your satisfaction level with the product? And this one was from earlier in 2023, before the whole Broadcom fiasco came up. But year over year, if you look at these numbers, they kept increasing, right? More people complaining about downtime, the average amount of hours, like we were just talking about, that it takes just to keep it running and happy and healthy, that's increasing. So we always wanted to kind of dodge that bullet as much as possible. And we utilize a KVM derivative as our hypervisor, but we've made it much easier to manage than you're probably used to, even against VMware kind of UIs.
Okay. Well, let's say then that you're like you were, where you were a VMware admin, or I was a VMware admin and a VCP back about the time they invented the letters V, C, and P.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've been around this a long time and we're familiar with it. How is the SC platform similar or different from what we're used to in vSphere, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a cost for having to learn something new.
Yeah. So better than actually probably trying to explain it. Let's just see it here. So
Always better to tell.
Yeah, let's do this live. So all right, so I've just brought up a scale computing dashboard here. So this is my demo cluster that I have in my lab here. First of all, you're just going to manage it through a web browser. It's HTML5. There's no plugins there or anything. The other thing too is when I connect to the management system, we got rid of the idea of the vCenter. vCenter was great until, if you've ever had issues with that precious database that it has on there, then it's a bad week, right? So with us, we wanted to eliminate that single point of failure, and you'll find that's a common thread with everything we do. Let's get rid of single points of failure here. So the management is distributed across every host within the cluster. So basically, if you want to look at it one way, I have 3 vCenters that manage this, if you want to look at it that way. But you connect to any one of the IPs or DNS names of these host boxes, and it presents you with this central management piece. You'll find that this has more of a tablet smartphone feel to it than just folders and directories and things like that, for structuring my virtual machines. Pretty clean interface up top, gives you a heads up. It tells you everything that's happening in the cluster as far as resource consumption. These gauges, they're color coded for failover capacity. So even as I kind of pack VMs in, I know as long as I'm green, as long as I'm yellow, I know I have that N+1 failover capacity. They'll turn orange, yellow, or they'll turn orange and red, send you alerts letting you know when you're getting past those thresholds. So very easy to see that. But these boxes right here represent those physical hosts. I can see how the VMs are consuming the memory in each and every one of those hosts. On this side of it, I can flip it to the drive layout. Now, the number of drives, types of drives, that all varies depending on what you need for your environment. We can pack it full of drives, or heck, maybe they're just single drive systems. So lots of customization when it comes to that storage piece here. But most of the action happens down here where I have my virtual machines. You can categorize them by application names. Maybe it's my, maybe it's my CRM apps, and I'll put those all together. And then maybe a team member, he has his applications that he's testing things on here, or maybe it's even grouped by locations, right? So group your virtual machines together however you want to. Each one of these tiles is a VM. All the tools to manage the VM are right here around the VM. So if I want to come in, make a quick modification to a setting on a VM, it's 3 clicks. If I want to create a new VM, it's 3 clicks. If I want to replicate across town to another location, it's 3 clicks. So again, the big difference goes back to what you were talking about earlier. It's that time saving, right? I don't have to sit here, know what every single check mark is. I'm not reading white papers all evening long. It becomes very intuitive here.
Yeah, the UI is super clean, and you're right. It's just extremely intuitive. When we introduce it to our customers, new admins sit down and they just can't believe this is all there is to managing it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even like, and most times people say, well, that looks good, but how do you even create a VM, right? Well, just come in here, hit the plus sign, and I'll just say, hey, here's a new VM 123 or something, whatever I want to name it, and say, hey, this might be a SQL box of some kind here. Tags, that's these categories. I can use existing ones, or we'll call this one live demo. I'll just put it in a new category there. It's a Windows box, give it whatever kind of hardware we want here. Let's give it maybe a 700 gig drive. And heck, maybe I want this thing to be server 2022, right? And then I hit the create button. That was it. I didn't have to do any research to see where do I have 800 gigs of free space. I don't tell it what host to live on. All the intelligence and automation is baked into the software. So I just told it what I wanted. And now the product goes, oh, well, let's look at the performance metrics of everything that's in here and optimally place it within the cluster. So it'll do all that load balancing back in work for me. We'll see its name probably, show up here somewhere. But that's how you kind of create that virtual machine. It's very simple. It takes 3 clicks, right? And that's all it took.
It's very straightforward. A lot less overhead.
Yep.
We're talking about, where that's kind of handy is these situations where we're talking about managing applications and VMs that live outside of these protected data centers, right? Where we've got all these people. Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff are you guys seeing where people are using the Scale products and the SC platform out at the edge, and how do you guys play in that space?
Yeah, so that's a good one too. So everything I've showed you on that UI, that's great if I'm the admin sitting in the server room with the gear, right? But what about those edge locations that I mentioned earlier, right? We have customers that are in the fast food business, and they have thousands of sites throughout the nation, even globally, things like that. So how do those retailers and those type of markets, how do they deal with that? You can't afford to kind of roll trucks out to every little hiccup that happens. So what we have for folks like that is, I'm going to open up a new browser tab here. We have what's called Fleet Manager here. So what Fleet Manager does is it creates a cloud-based UI. You don't have to worry about building it or hosting it. It's all cloud-based here. But from here, I can see what's going on in all of my Scale computing deployments that I have around the world, whether it's gear in the UK, whether it's a couple states over, heck, even if it's just 3 buildings down from where my location is. I can see what's going on here, right? I can see how much gear that I have at those locations. Is it a cluster? Are they single node deployments? What's the VMs like? I could even see resource utilization here, right? All in this kind of one window. But the best part for this is if I see systems that have issues, like this one says it has a warning on it, right? If I come in here, we can look and see kind of some historic metrics of what's going on, but I can see what that error is. I didn't have to go log into that site. This could be a cluster in Oklahoma or something like that, right? I didn't have to go, hey, how do we connect to it? Do I RDP to this thing? What's going on? I can see that, hey, it's someone's packed VMs on here with too much memory. It's still fine. It's an orange warning. It's not a critical. Everything's still fine. We just got to make sure we do some cleanup here. VMs are still operating, ones that should be on there. So this gives you that kind of easy view into all of those sites, and I can manage them basically like it's one site here. The other great piece with this too is I can access this gear from anywhere in the world. Right. So I'm sitting at home here today in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've got some lab gear here at a colo facility that's somewhere up in Michigan. Right. So if I want to access this gear, or here, let's do a different one. I know one that's even farther away. So Michigan, Indiana, is not far enough. So I got this one called Goose. I know this one's on the West Coast here. So if I want to access this one, I don't need to create VPN connections to that gear. I don't need to have an RDP jump box on site or anything like that, right? Those kind of, those little kind of secret systems that we build as system admins that we don't let anybody know about.
Right.
But yeah, so this eliminates the need for that. I can see, hey, if there's work that needs to be done here, up top, we've created this this button here. We call it Secure Link. And what this will do is it'll create a reverse proxied connection from that gear on the West Coast to this cloud interface here. So when I hit go to cluster right here, it's going to initiate that connection here. Again, I don't have any VPNs to this site. I'm not going through a jump box. But from here, I'll go ahead and add my credentials into this guy here. If I can remember my password while everybody's watching, that's always the hard part, right?
Right.
So let's log into it here. And so, hey, I just accessed a system out on the West Coast here, and it was pretty easy, right? Again, that time-saving piece, right? I didn't go to the 3-ring binder full of all of our sites. What's the IPs? What's the passwords, the secret keys, and all of that to get there. So now I'm able to access, do whatever work I need to on those systems. But now here's the other thing. A lot of people will say, well, hey, Frank, that's great once I get everything up and deployed. And, it always looks easy after the hard work is done, right? How do I get it to that point, right? So let's say we're putting a new store down in Texas somewhere, or even overseas somewhere. Reach out to Brightworks, order the gear there, and it's on a FedEx truck heading down to Austin, Texas. I don't want to have to book a flight and fly down to Austin, Texas to set that hardware up, right? So what I can do is come in here and I can say, hey, let's add a cluster, right? We'll call this one, TX cluster here. And then enter in the common network information for that site there. Hey, what's the subnet? What's the gateways? That type of information that's going on there. Then I hit the add node button. Even though that gear is on a FedEx truck heading down to Texas, it'll show up in my inventory here. So I can say, hey, this piece of hardware, this piece of hardware, and this piece of hardware are heading down to Texas for that site. Now I can come in, I can go ahead and assign IPs and network information to those gear, and then hit the create cluster button. And what'll happen next is it'll come in here and it'll set that config right here in this staged area of my fleet manager. Now it's just waiting for that gear. Once the gear arrives on site, I just need somebody, a local help desk guy, somebody that puts toner in the printers, that type of stuff there. I just need him to cable the gear up and hit the power button on the front. What it'll do is it'll grab a local DHCP address, and then it'll pull down this configuration file, set up the permanent IPs. It'll create the cluster. It'll do the multipathing. It'll do the failure groups of the disk, everything that you would normally do kind of step by step in that configuration, automates it for you right out of the gate. And then once it's done, it's kind of in the list with the rest of your stuff. Now I can automate virtual machine deployments. That's all scriptable as well if I need to. So it makes life at the edge very easy and kind of controllable in this one screen here.
Our guys love this. That all we need to do is get some kind of very relatively simply skilled remote hands person. That's just we just need them competent enough to be able to plug in connections. Yep. With the stuff, open a box and rack it and plug in connections, and everything else just it just comes together very, very naturally. And we deal so much with these sort of remote non-data center connections that it just saves us huge amounts of time for deployments and going to do stuff. And in larger organization deployments where they have a team, it's a big selling point because they know they can cut down having to dispatch their people to all their remote sites.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, just doing that can help pay for a scale deployment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so far the record for the quickest deployment is 28 minutes. Right.
Yeah. I believe
So
that.
from an empty rack to, hey, I've got my infrastructure up and it's ready to accept virtual machines. Everything's deployed, everything's load balanced, all that stuff. 28 minutes, right? And so most of that time is cutting the tape and pulling the gear out of the boxes, right? And so, and then one that just dawned on me. So one of our customers, and if you hit our website, you'll probably see a lot of these case studies on there. But you want to talk about edge sites, right? What's the edgiest site that we can do? We have one customer that is a large, I don't know what you call them, logistics, like shipping. It's those big cargo ships right out on the ocean, right? Me, I guess, not, being in the Midwest, landlocked, I don't know much about boats, but heck, I thought everything was still those big steering wheels and whatever else, those cargo ships like the Titanic or something. But they're highly computerized on there, right? They have all kinds of global positioning stuff, engine controls, even the environmentals of like kind of the living spaces on those, right? And so all of that's computer controlled there. And so typically they used to have just 3 or 4 kind of isolated tower systems on there. They were trying Hyper-V, they were doing the free VMware stuff, but they, budget wise, they couldn't just create a cluster on there because the licensing for all of the ships that they have was just way too exorbitant there. So they now have scale hardware, a 3-host cluster, and I'll talk about what gear they have later on here. But they're able to put a cluster on those ships to get that high availability that they're looking for, because I didn't realize it until they told me. It's like, hey, if the system that has to do with positioning, as far as kind of, they always have to have beacons on, they always have to know exactly where they are in the ocean, because 4 degrees to the left all of a sudden means you're in a completely different country over time, right? And so so anytime there's failures in there, they have to drop anchor on that ship, sit there and wait, and they have to fly IT guys out on helicopters to whatever that remote location is. So you want to talk about an expensive hard drive replacement cost, that's kind of it. So getting that high availability was key for that, and also to make it affordable. But yeah, that's that's kind of the edgiest stuff that we have is, hey, it's in the middle of the ocean floating somewhere, right? So that's
and people don't think about those kind of deployments, but whether you're talking about ships or you're talking about really remote farms. We had one customer where the big challenge was that bears would literally come tear the cabling up out of the field, and you got to send somebody. So anything that you can do that cuts that stuff down, far better. Yeah. Now, here's one of the things though, man. And we deal with this all the time because we do so much around security, because we've always worked with compliance, companies that have compliance concerns, things like that. And now the threat environment's so significant out there. Companies have concerns about data protection. They're concerned about high availability, protecting against cyber attacks, ransomware. I mean, we see this now. I was going to say we see it every day. We're actually seeing it multiple times a day. So, great, you got this simple system, but what can Scale do to kind of help with that concern?
Yeah. And a lot of organizations, we get requests all the time, people that are They have consultants coming in doing pen testing and things like that, like they should, yeah. But a lot of companies now, to even get insurance, they have to make sure
Right.
that their data is protected and things like that. It's not like, hey, that'd be a good thing to do. It's no, hey, if you want insurance for the
Yeah, you have
company,
to do it.
yeah, you have to do this now, right? And so, um, let me flip back to my cluster here. So, a couple things that we do to kind of help mitigate a lot of the risk there. So, one, I talked early on that, hey, trying to eliminate those single points of failure, right, everywhere we can. So the cluster is built to be able to withstand multiple failures. So one of these is with that storage. Again, we designed the entire product with the idea of, securities in the design. We want it to be secured by default, right? We didn't want it to be, hey, I have to go through this 12-page document and find the one check marked that's going to save my hide, right? We don't want to do that. And we want the security to be very easy to kind of manage as well on here. So something as simple as kind of maintaining the integrity of the data that's on these disks. We take that very serious to a lot of extremes. So one thing we've done is we've created our own storage platform on the back end here. So when you stand up that cluster, you're not going to create LUNs and RAID sets and then carve that up even smaller into data stores and things like that. That's all eliminated. So we've created our own kind of secret sauce when it comes to storage. It's called Scribe. And what that does is, by default, as soon as we power it up, anytime I put data on these disks, it's going to use a combination of mirroring and striping to make sure that data is scattered across this cluster. And it's going to do so in a manner that no single drive will take any virtual machine down. No single node will have anything unique to keep that virtual machine from operating. So in our environment, let's say drive 1 on this first node here decides to quit working, goes up in smoke, right? Drives die, right? It's just common. In pretty much every product, hey, that's fine. We can handle that. Every other product can kind of handle that too. Let's say it's 2 hours later and I lose drive 3 on this cluster, and I haven't even replaced the first one yet. A lot of products, they start dropping, right? Hey, we're going to have data loss here. Doesn't impact us. All the VMs humming along. Let's lose a third drive. Let's lose a fourth drive, all within this same kind of 1 day period here, right? Zero data loss to the VMs. Everything is still humming along, chugging along just as it should, right? Because we have this active mirroring that takes place. Anytime there's drives that go down, the storage tier automatically knows kind of where every block is, where every redundant block is, and knows if one's kind of orphaned and doesn't have that redundant piece anymore. So that's how we can achieve those kind of high levels of availability on that storage piece. So I've got that data protection there on that disk. The other thing too is with this storage that we created, one, we've eliminated about 60% of the data path that you would see in, say, a traditional SAN environment, right? We're not kind of traveling back and forth between controllers and this and that. The VMs get direct block level access to this disk. Now, because of this, that eliminates things like storage protocols. There's nothing that's being used between these hosts. There's no iSCSI. There's no NFS. There's no CIFS, anything like that that's being utilized. So that eliminates an exploit location there, right? No man in the middle, nothing to intercept there. The other thing too is there is no file system across our disk. It is a pure block placement engine.
Right.
So even if I get physical access, there's no files and directories to traverse. There's no known kind of folder structure that I'm going to inject anything into. That's all eliminated as well too. So that's kind of inherent by design on that security piece there, just on the storage there. Now, the other thing that we've implemented in here because of that storage is a very wild way that you can use snapshotting. So again, as a former VMware admin, coming over and actually, if I click this camera on this new VM, this allows me to take a snapshot, right? Hey, VMware can do snapshots too. Big deal. What's the difference here, right? This is where the mind bender is. So with VMware, you learn that there's kind of limits that you have to stick to, right?
Pretty
And
significant.
so, yeah. So one of those limits is if I take a snapshot on here, I don't want to keep it around for a very long period of time in VMware. And that's because they do what's called that copy on write style snapshot, where it creates this Delta file that hangs off the side of the virtual machine. It'll usually have underscore 001 or 002, whatever number snapshot that it is. And so because of that, they can get pretty big if it's an active virtual machine here, right? And so most organizations that I worked at, we typically had an internal policy that was like saying, hey, you know what, 3 days is probably about as long as you're supposed to keep a snapshot around. If it's a pretty dormant VM, maybe we'll stretch and say, hey, you know what, 1 week is probably about it. But that's about the limit, right? Other than that, I've got scripts running that are going to alert me and start triggering some deletions and consolidations and things like that. But with our storage, we have no Delta. I can't type and talk at the same time, but there's no Delta file that hangs off the side of the VM. The VM continues to always use that same original virtual disk here. Our snapshots are built based on metadata and pointer records to those original blocks. And so now customers that have transitioned from VMware over to us, once they get used to these snapshots, they say, hey, you know what? I keep them around for 6 months. I keep them around for 8 months, stuff that they would have never done in a VMware environment here. So that limitation out the window. But the other limitation is typically what I'm doing right now, and that's kind of taking too many snapshots on a live VM. I love doing this with a hardcore VMware person on the phone because they're usually screaming expletives.
They're freaking out.
Yeah, because, hey, you know what? In VMware, if you take 4 or 5 snapshots, it's going to slow the system down. If you get any more than that, it's creeping and crawling and quits responding to ping requests. And so you're limited to a small subset of snapshots. With us, you can do over 5,000 snapshots on these virtual machines there, right? Big game changer. But the best part is how you can use these snapshots. And this kind of parlays into that security piece. So let's say I want to protect this system against malware, ransomware, anything like that. I'm doing my traditional backup. I'm backing it up, every night at midnight or whatever it is that I have going on here. But that's a 24-hour window of potential data loss, right? I could write data to it at 8 o'clock in the morning and then gets deleted by noon by something malicious, and heck, it's not on my backups. So how can I mitigate that? What I can do is come in here and create schedules to automate those snapshots. I was sitting there clicking like crazy, but I'm sure most admins don't want to do that. So come in here, create schedules. Here's one that I built called prod. If we look at it, I can tell it, you know what, whatever VM I point this to, take a snapshot of it every 10 minutes throughout the day. Nobody's taking backups of their systems every 10 minutes, right? But hey, once they're an hour old, they're kind of useless to me, so go ahead and delete them. Because I also tell it to do it every 2 hours, keep it longer. I tell it to do it early in the morning, keep it for a week, right? So that's all within that one routine. So now if I want to protect this VM, I just come in here to my snapshots and I say, hey, let's select a schedule. Let's follow that prod routine that I got somewhere here. It's right there. and I hit update. So right there in 3 clicks, I'm going to have a kind of an immutable protective image of that system every 10 minutes throughout the day, right? But now the twist here is our snapshots are not rewind buttons, right? That's kind of the only use case in VMware is that, hey, if I goof it up during an upgrade, I can rewind and undo what I did. But with us, again, much different. Come in here, you can see I took 14 snapshots while we were talking. There's all the names there. But whatever point in time I want to go to, whether it's a snapshot that's 10 minutes old, or it could be a snapshot that's 2 months old or 3 days old, I can say create a copy of that new server exactly the way it was at that point in history. 3 clicks, and I wait probably about 5 seconds. And now I have a complete standalone instance of that system all to its own that has that data from whatever point in history I want to. Now I could come in here if I want to validate that it works. I can maybe put it on a different network. Maybe 245 is a lab network VLAN, put it over there, boot it up and run it and keep it separate from this system. Test upgrades, get rid of malware, validate that it's malware. But if I don't want to do the entire VM, I can also do just the drives here. So I can come to a point and expand it and say, you know what, I really just need the data off the 700 gig drive. I don't need the OS and everything. So I can take a drive from history and mount it back to the original VM or any virtual machine that lives on my cluster here.
Very, very flexible, and we've eliminated a lot of the attack surface by the file system and removing so much of the data path, and then the data's there, right? I mean, even if something comes along and hits that server with malware, you've got a snapshot that's maintainable and mountable and the whole bit.
Yeah, and you can even tell these snapshots to replicate offsite to another place for safekeeping, right? They work great as that kind of disaster recovery method. My recovery at a remote facility, I can measure it in seconds. It's not hours. It's not days.
Right. Yeah, and that's very easy to set up too. We've done that with customers where it's just automated, it's pushing them out there, and failing over to that new site is literally just a matter of seconds. And that too is a huge time and money saver for customers. Well, I see Ben popping on here, which means it's time to.
You know, in the comedy club, they do the flashlight in the back and lets the comedian know.
Yeah.
So that was your flashlight there. I just wanted to start to wrap things up here. We're getting close towards the end of the webinar. And I tell you what, it's been fantastic sitting back and listening and watching what's happening here. And I know the audience has got a lot out of this. The visuals are great. Just understanding a little bit about what we need to be doing, getting the applications outside the data center and edge computing, just kind of learning that and understanding that as well has been really great. So I want to thank Doug Miller for the questions and the insights from Brightworks Group. Also want to thank Frank Seal for his expertise with scale computing and kind of showing everything having to do with the product. And that being said, we want to thank everyone for joining us. That's going to wrap up today's webinar. We're going to get a recording out to everyone that's registered for the webinar today. And so that will be getting out to everyone. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed today's virtual coffee talk. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.